This could be a very, very long panel because I don't hear anything talked about as much as central bankers and whether they're doing a good job of communicating. What do we expect to hear?
Well, they're going to talk about the difficulty of communicating with the markets and how they want to be able to lead the markets to where they need to go and not be fighting against them. And it's been an issue for the Fed until recently because, of course, we had the taper tantrum, and that's fresh in everybody's mind, where you just suggest something's going to happen that the market's not expecting and you get a major reaction. We've seen a little bit of that with the ECB with Mario Draghi as he's tried to move markets towards the idea of tapering without letting them think that they're going to stop easing. Mark Carney's been okay so far. Everybody bought into the idea that they were going to raise rates once, but he has to convince people they're not going to go again anytime soon. And of course, Kuroda back and forth with the markets. He's basically sold them on the idea it's QE forever. So it'll be interesting to hear what they have to say, and it'll be interesting to see if any of the questions bring out anything on what they're going to do next.
What are the key issues that we should be looking out for? I mean, we are seeing a flattening yield curve that continues. What are we expecting to be discussed?
Well, that could be an issue because it's an issue around the globe. I mean, we're seeing the periphery spreads really narrow to bonds in Europe. It's been basically the question is what's happening with credit these days, and that could be an issue because a lot of what's going on is based on what markets think the central banks are going to do.
Well, and how difficult is it to have a communications policy if you're not sure you understand what you're communicating? In this sense, inflation. All the central banks seem to be having a problem with that. So how do you communicate what you think about inflation when basically you're admitting the models may not be working so well?
Well, we've had two attempts at that. We've had Janet Yellen, who gave a speech in Cleveland at the NABE conference, and Mario Draghi last summer in Sintra, their conference, laying out the various reasons and saying, we think we know what's going on, but here are the reasons we could be wrong. It's a lot for the markets to take in, and it doesn't necessarily mean that they're going to believe it, but that's the best story they've got going so far. It'd be interesting to see how you phrase, that's the best story I got. It's my story, and I'm sticking to it.
That's right.
At this point, who are we thinking that are doing the best job in this communication strategy? I mean, I saw the BOJ governor change their rhetoric. In fact, before they used to want to surprise the markets. We had that Halloween shock treat, and now it's more about let's keep expectations in check. Who's being successful right now?
Well, probably you'd have to say over the last year it's the Fed, because they've basically said we're going to raise rates slowly, we're going to raise rates at a measured pace, and the markets have continued to price that in. And they haven't had any kind of real movement after the Fed moves because it's been so well telegraphed. And you could see that with the decision to go ahead and taper the balance sheet. There was absolutely no reaction in the markets. That had been well choreographed. The ECB probably the farthest from it in the sense that they're trying to manage this transition into a taper and get the markets to go along, and people aren't exactly sure where, when, how much.
Well, and it's interesting you mentioned Sintra in connection with the ECB, because as I recall, what happened was Mario Draghi went to Sintra, and then they had to walk it back and say, well, he didn't quite mean it that much, because the market, they thought, overreacted.
Well, and it was to a very simple phrase. He said the era of deflation is over. And he meant that we're not worried about that anymore. We still have disinflation. We still have an inflation problem, but they took it as maybe we're going to start raising rates soon.
So should we expect any big market moves given everything that's coming up this week?
I know 4 people who are going to be there tomorrow who are going to do their darndest not to make any news that would move markets.
So before we leave you, though, Senator Crapo has a new proposal.
Yeah.
Just briefly, what is it? Well,
the big concern with Dodd-Frank has been the impact on smaller banks. And what he's doing is proposing to raise the SIFI level, the level at which you get additional supervision, from $50 billion. 250 billion banks and under would be able to not have the Fed supervise them anymore, and there would be less oversight for banks with $100 billion in assets. So it would be a real relief for smaller banks in terms of regulatory costs and compliance.